She was ridiculed at target shooting by a millionaire until her first shot silenced everyone. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. Emily looked at the bow in her calloused hands, running her fingers gently over the letters carved into the wood. Patience conquers steel. The words, worn by time, still carried the same power her grandfather had imprinted on them decades ago. The object was more than a sporting instrument. It was a family relic, a silent witness to interrupted dreams and promises not yet fulfilled. Sitting on the porch of her simple house in the countryside, she contemplated the horizon while the most important decision of her life weighed on her shoulders. The registration form for the Regional Archery Championship was on the table, partially filled out. After 15 years away from competitions, something inside her had awakened. Emily's story was known only to a few in the small town. Before abandoning her promising career in sports, she was one of the greatest revelations in national archery. Her youth records remained unbeaten in some categories, but life had other plans. Her mother had fallen seriously ill, requiring constant care and expensive treatments. As an only child, there was no choice to make. Now at 42, after so much time dedicated to caring for others, Emily felt it was time to reclaim her own path. Every morning, before starting her work as a volunteer instructor at the local community project, she practiced for 2 hours. Her natural talent, combined with the rigorous discipline she had never abandoned, had kept her technique as sharp as a well-maintained blade. The community project she coordinated was her greatest joy. In a makeshift warehouse, she taught children and teenagers the art of archery using adapted equipment, PVC bows and straw targets. She saw in those young eyes the same spark that had once inhabited her own, but now something greater was calling her. The regional championship was the country's main competition, bringing together the biggest names in the sport. It was a completely different world from hers, full of technology, millionaire sponsorships, and cutting-edge equipment. Emily knew she would be seen as an intruder, an anomaly amid that circus of modernity. Her old pickup truck, inherited from her father, would need to endure the 3-day journey to the capital. The handcrafted bow, although perfectly functional and legally approved for competitions, would certainly provoke disdainful looks. But none of that mattered. She had something that no digital sensor or electronic sight could replicate: pure instinct, cultivated through years of methodical and silent practice. The decision was practically made when she heard knocks on the front door. It was Martha, her 60-year-old neighbor, bringing a still warm cornbread. As usual, she sat down for coffee and conversation. Emily showed her the registration form, explaining her intentions. "You've always been different, girl," said Martha, sipping her coffee. "When everyone was running after the new, you were perfecting the old. When they said something was impossible, you proved otherwise. You'll be missed here at the project during those days, but these children need to see that dreams don't have an expiration date." Martha's words touched Emily deeply. It wasn't just for herself that she needed to compete. It was for all those who never had the chance, for her children in the project who dreamed of possibilities greater than their current reality. That night, while finishing filling out the application, Emily mentally relived every moment of her journey. The cold training mornings, the afternoons caring for her mother, the evenings teaching at the community project. Each experience had been a brick in building who she was today. Returning to competitions wouldn't just be a participation, it would be a declaration that excellence doesn't depend on resources, but on dedication. Before sleeping, Emily stored the bow in its worn leather case, a gift from her grandfather. Tomorrow she would begin her journey to the capital, carrying with her not just a wooden bow, but an entire history of resilience and perseverance. The archery world was about to welcome back someone who should never have left. The Olympic training center seemed even more imposing than Emily remembered. The facilities had been completely modernized, transforming the place into a futuristic complex that in no way resembled the environment where she had trained in her youth. Luxury SUVs occupied the parking lot, and athletes in high-tech uniforms moved through the corridors with equipment that seemed pulled from science fiction movies. Emily parked her pickup truck between two imported cars. The contrast was stark. She adjusted the bun in her hair, which was beginning to show gray at the temples, and took a deep breath before getting out of the vehicle. Her uniform was simple, durable cotton pants and a basic white polo shirt without logos or sponsorships. On her feet, well-preserved but visibly old hiking boots. As she headed for accreditation, she noticed curious glances and some mocking smiles. Whispers followed her through the corridors, but she maintained an upright posture and a firm gaze. Years of practice had taught her that true strength comes from within, not from appearances. "I can't believe what my eyes are seeing," a male voice, laden with irony, cut through the air. Emily Stewart, the vanished legend, coming back to play with the professionals. She immediately recognized the voice of Richard Morgan, current president of the National Archery Confederation and owner of the country's largest sports equipment company. In their youth, they had been team colleagues. Emily always surpassed him in competitions, something his ego had never fully digested. "Richard," she responded with a serene nod. "Time passes, but some things remain the same. Others change." "Drastically," he retorted, looking up and down at her simple clothes and worn leather case. "This is no longer the same sport you knew, Emily. Today we have standards, technology, excellence. It's no place for antiques." The last word was pronounced with a contempt that made several of those present laugh discreetly. Emily maintained a calm countenance. Years caring for her sick mother had taught her the value of patience in the face of adversity. "I came to compete, Richard. Just that." "Compete?" He laughed, an artificial and theatrical sound. "With that bow? Let me guess. Is it still the same one your grandfather made? Please, Emily, don't expose yourself to ridicule. We have a reputation to uphold here." At that moment, a young athlete passing by stopped, observing the scene with interest. Emily noticed that her hands were trembling slightly, a clear indication of the pre-competition nervousness she knew so well. "Mr. Morgan," a firm voice interrupted the conversation. It was Charles Anderson, a veteran Federation official, approaching with determined steps. "Ms. Stewart is correctly registered in the open category, and her equipment has valid certification for competition according to international regulations." Richard paled slightly, but maintained his artificial smile. "Well, then we'll see what antiques are capable of," he said, spinning on his heels and moving away with his entourage. Emily took the moment to approach the young athlete who was still observing the scene. "Breathe deeply through your nose. Hold for 3 seconds and release slowly through your mouth," she whispered gently. "It helps with nervousness." The girl looked at her in surprise, rehearsed a grateful smile, and followed the advice. Her trembling visibly decreased. As she headed to the preparation area, Emily reflected on how that world had changed. The sport, that had once been about precision, concentration, and self-knowledge, had transformed into a showcase of technology and status. But she knew that at the crucial moment, when the archer faces the target, no equipment can replace true instinct. In darted the warm-up area, she removed her bow from its case. The dark hand-worked wood contrasted dramatically with the carbon fiber and titanium bows around her. But when she touched it, Emily felt the same connection as always, one that went beyond technique, beyond technology. It was an extension of her own being. The carved words shone under the artificial light of the gymnasium. "Patience conquers steel." She smiled, recalling the long afternoons watching her grandfather work on the wood, his skilled hands transforming a rough piece of oak into a functional work of art. Now, more than ever, those words carried a special meaning. The competition would begin soon, and Emily knew that each shot would be a battle not only against the targets, but against an entire system that had forgotten the origins of the sport. Her return was not just a participation, it was a silent manifesto in favor of essence over appearance, technique over technology. The gymnasium was buzzing with the energy of competition. Hundreds of spectators occupied the bleachers while competitors prepared for the first elimination test. The rule was simple and unforgiving: a single shot at 70 meters, miss, and you're out. There was no margin for second chances. Emily discreetly observed her competitors. Most used electronic equipment to measure wind speed, temperature, and humidity. Sophisticated sensors alerted them to the slightest variation in environmental conditions. Some competitors spent more time looking at their digital screens than at the targets. Competitor number 47, Emily Stewart, announced the sound system. Prepare for position. A murmur ran through the bleachers, some muffled laughter, echoed when she positioned herself, her traditional bow contrasting dramatically with the technological environment. Richard Morgan from the VIP area watched with a scornful smile, already anticipating what he considered would be a spectacle of humiliation. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the environment around her. Years of practice had taught her to read the air in a way no sensor could replicate. The gentle breeze entering from the side of the gymnasium, the slight temperature variation near the lights, each detail was instinctively processed. The young athlete who had received her advice earlier was in the bleachers, watching attentively. Beside her, other competitors whispered and laughed, some even filming with their phones, hoping to record what they imagined would be a moment of embarrassment. Emily opened her eyes. She positioned herself. The world around her seemed to disappear. There was only her, the bow, and the target. Her fingers gently caressed the string, a gesture as natural as breathing. The wooden bow, which knew every nuance of her movements, responded like an old friend. The shot was fluid, elegant, almost musical in its execution. The arrow cut through the air in a perfect trajectory, as if dancing with the invisible currents that others desperately tried to measure with their devices. The impact was precise, absolute center. The silence that followed was deafening. The laughter ceased. The phones lowered. In the VIP area, Richard Morgan dropped his champagne glass. The young athlete in the bleachers was the first to stand up, applauding. Others followed her example until an ovation took over the gymnasium. It wasn't just the precision of the shot that impressed. It was the form, the elegance, the visible connection between archer and bow. Emily retreated discreetly to the waiting area while social networks began to buzz. Videos of her perfect shot spread quickly, accompanied by admiring comments and improvised hashtags. Vacuous, vintage archer, Dijon instinct beats technology began to gain traction. Behind the scenes, a small revolution was underway. Young athletes began questioning their coaches about traditional techniques. Some even put away their tablets and sensors, trying to imitate the more organic approach they had witnessed. The first elimination phase continued, with other competitors making their shots. Some, clearly shaken by Emily's performance, missed targets they would normally hit with ease. Others, inspired, managed to maintain concentration and advance. In her corner, Emily remained serene, mentally aligning her energies for the next phases. She knew that perfect shot was just the beginning. The real battle was just starting. A reporter tried to approach for an interview, but Emily politely declined. Her most important words would be spoken through her bow, not her voice. However, she couldn't help but notice an elderly man observing everything from the highest bleacher. Her former coach, Michael Sullivan, had come to silently support her. While other competitors focused on adjusting their equipment and checking digital readings, Emily dedicated her time between trials to a simple ritual, cleaning her bow with a soft cloth, checking the string tension with experienced fingers, and mainly breathing. Each inhalation and exhalation was a deeper connection with her instrument, a tuning that went beyond technique. The first phase ended with dozens of eliminations. Of the 100 initial competitors, only 50 would move on to the next stage. Emily had not only qualified, she had established a new standard. Her perfect shot would be the talk of the town for a long time. In the locker room, the young athlete who had received her breathing advice approached timidly. "Ms. Stewart," she said, "thank you for the tip. I managed to qualify too." Emily smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Julie," replied the girl. "Well, Julie, remember, technology can help us, but the true bow is in here," said Emily, lightly touching her own heart. The young woman nodded, her eyes shining with a new understanding. The second phase of the competition demanded even more from the archers, 3 timed shots at 80 meters distance. The challenge wasn't just accuracy, but also the ability to maintain consistency under time pressure. Competitors would have only 30 seconds to make all 3 shots. The buzz in the stands had changed significantly. Where before there had been mockery regarding the vintage archer, now there was genuine expectation. Groups of young athletes gathered near the competition area, eager to observe her unique technique. Julie, the young archer, had created a post on her social profile that was quickly going viral. "I learned more in 5 minutes of observation than in months of automated training. She doesn't need sponsorship. We need her." The post already had thousands of shares. Richard Morgan observed everything with growing concern. His main sponsored athletes seemed destabilized, some even questioning the excessive dependence on technology. In a heated call with his marketing team, he demanded strategies to control the narrative that was beginning to slip from his control. Emily prepared with her characteristic calmness. Her ritual remained the same. Clean the bow, check the string, breathe. The ancient wood gleamed under the gymnasium lights, the carved words seeming to pulse with their own life. Patience conquers steel. When her turn came, the entire gymnasium held its breath. 30 seconds, 3 shots, 80 meters. The first shot was as precise as a Swiss watch, center of the target. The second, equally perfect, hitting exactly the same point. The third, impressively split the 2 previous arrows, 22 seconds. She had completed the challenge with 8 seconds to spare. The explosion of applause was instantaneous. In the stands, people hugged as if they had witnessed a miracle. Veterans of the sport shook their heads in disbelief. Some famous coaches, frantically photographed, trying to capture every detail of her technique. Michael Sullivan, her former coach, smiled silently from his place in the bleachers. His teary eyes revealed a pride that words could not express. He knew better than anyone what that moment meant. Behind the scenes, a silent revolution was taking shape. Young athletes began to question the status quo. Some even removed sensors from their bows, seeking a purer connection with the equipment. The movement that was beginning to be called free instinct gained strength with each minute. During the break, Emily found a moment of quietness in the preparation area. Her bow rested in her lap while she meditated on her journey. The memories of her mother, of the community project, of the children she trained, everything mixed in that moment of reflection. A group of children managed to slip past security and approached her, eyes wide with admiration. "How do you do?" "Hit without a computer?" asked a boy no more than 10 years old. Emily smiled, picking up an arrow. "See these feathers?" she showed them. "They talk to the wind. You just have to learn to listen." The children looked amazed, absorbing every word. At that moment, without Emily knowing, one of the parents was filming the scene. The video of this improvised little lesson would go viral in the next few hours with the caption, "The real technology is knowledge passed from generation to generation." Meanwhile, in the corridors of the training center, Richard Morgan held emergency meetings with his team. Emily's impact on the sports equipment market was beginning to worry him. Shares of his company were already showing fluctuations in the first negotiations of the day. The competition continued, and more athletes were eliminated. Of the 50 who started the second phase, only 25 would move on to the next stage. Emily not only qualified, she established a new scoring record for the phase, even using traditional equipment. At the end of that day, as the sun set, through the gymnasium's stained glass windows, Emily put her bow back in the worn case. Julie approached again, this time accompanied by other young archers. "Miss Stewart," she said, "we've formed a study group. We want to learn the old way, the true way. Could you teach us?" Emily looked at the young people, seeing in their eyes the same sparkle she saw in the children of her community project. "True learning," she replied, "begins when we stop depending on machines to tell us what our senses already know." The third phase of the competition presented a challenge that made even the most experienced archers tremble, moving targets at 60 meters distance. They weren't simply targets that moved in a straight line. They followed irregular patterns, changing direction and speed randomly. It was a test that challenged not only precision, but the ability to anticipate and adapt. The day dawned with a different energy at the training center. The bleachers were packed, with people carrying handmade posters in support of the People's Archer, as Emily was beginning to be called on social networks. Some children even brought wooden bows, clearly inspired by her story. Behind the scenes, the tension was palpable. Competitors who heavily depended on technology were visibly nervous. Their state-of-the-art equipment, designed for static targets, would need to be constantly recalibrated to follow the erratic movements of the targets. The eye sensors can't process the changes quickly enough, a coach murmured to his athlete. We'll have to rely more on instinct today. The irony of the situation didn't go unnoticed. What was previously seen as antiquated, pure instinct was now becoming a necessity even for the most technological competitors. Emily prepared without her usual serenity. Years of training children with improvised targets that swayed in the wind had taught her more about moving targets than any computerized simulator could. In her community project, she often used bottles hanging on strings which the wind made dance unpredictably. Julie, who had qualified with distinction in the previous phases, approached Emily before the start of the trials. "How do you do it?" she asked in a low voice. "How do you hit something that's always changing?" Emily smiled, picking up a leaf that was falling from a nearby tree. "See this leaf? Before falling, it dances with the wind. It doesn't try to resist, doesn't try to control. It just flows. The secret isn't trying to predict where the target will be, but understanding how it moves." The young archer absorbed the words, her eyes shining with a new understanding. At that moment, discreetly, she turned off the motion sensors on her bow. The competition began. One after another, the archers faced the challenge. Many missed completely, their sophisticated equipment becoming more of an obstacle than an aid. Some achieved partial hits, but consistency was a problem. When Emily's turn came, the gymnasium fell silent. She positioned herself with the same calmness as always, her wooden bow gleaming under the lights. The targets began to move, their chaotic trajectories defying any predictable pattern. Emily took a deep breath, letting her senses expand. To everyone's surprise, she closed her eyes for a moment, just listening to the soft whir of the mechanisms moving the targets. When she opened them, her movements flowed like water. First arrow, perfect hit in the center of the moving target. Second arrow, same result, on a target that was moving even more rapidly. Third arrow, impeccable precision, even with the target, executing an abrupt change of direction. The bleachers exploded in applause. People stood up, shouted, some even cried. It was more than a demonstration of skill. It was the validation of something many had forgotten, the fundamental connection between archer and bow. Michael Sullivan, her former coach, slowly descended the bleacher stairs. His eyes met Emily's, and decades of shared history passed silently between them. He merely nodded, but that gesture contained all the pride in the world. In the VIP corridors, Richard Morgan watched everything with an indescribable expression. His empire of high-tech equipment was being shaken not by a more advanced competitor, but by something he had dismissed as obsolete. The phase ended with only 10 archers qualified for the final stage. Emily had not only qualified, she had established a new paradigm. On social networks, the lack of free instinct was becoming one of the most commented topics of the moment. While putting away her equipment, Emily found a carefully folded note in her case. It was from Julie. "What I learned today is worth more than all the sensors in the world. You're not just competing, you're reminding us of something we had forgotten. Thank you for showing us that sometimes to move forward, we need to look back." Emily carefully folded the note, keeping it with her bow. Tomorrow would be the grand finale, but she had already conquered something much bigger than any medal. She had planted a seed of change in the heart of a new generation. On the eve of the grand finale, the Olympic Training Center was experiencing a surprising transformation. In the corridors, young athletes shared breathing techniques instead of sensor data. In the practice areas, some even removed electronic equipment from their bows, seeking a purer connection with the instrument. Emily spent the afternoon in a quiet corner of the garden, performing her ritual maintenance on the bow. As her experienced hands slid over the material, memories flowed like a gentle river in her mind. She remembered the day her grandfather finished carving the bow, his calloused hands tracing the letters with artisanal precision. Patience conquers. Steel. Michael Sullivan, her former coach, approached silently, sitting on a nearby bench. For a few moments, they just observed together the sunset that tinged the sky orange. "You were always different," he finally said, his voice laden with memories. "Even when you were just a girl, you already understood that the bow wasn't a tool, it was a dance partner." Emily smiled, continuing her meticulous work on the bow. "You taught me that, Michael. Remember when you made me train blindfolded? Everyone thought it was crazy." "And look where we are now," he replied, gesturing to a group of young archers, practicing breathing techniques nearby. "You're changing more than a competition, Emily. You're changing the soul of the sport." The moment was interrupted by an unusual movement. Richard Morgan was crossing the garden toward them, his impeccable suit contrasting with the simplicity of the environment. For the first time since the beginning of the competition, there was no arrogance in his steps. "Emily," he called, his voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" Michael discreetly stood up, leaving them alone. Emily continued working on her bow, but made a gesture inviting Richard to sit. "You know," he began, seeming to choose his words carefully, "when you stopped competing, something changed in the sport. At the time, I was so focused on growing, on innovating, that I didn't notice what we were losing." Emily listened, in silence, her hands never stopping the rhythmic movement of bow maintenance. "My company is worth millions today," he continued. "We've developed technologies that seemed impossible a few years ago, but watching you these past few days, I realized that maybe we've lost our way." "It was never about technology or tradition, Richard," Emily responded softly. "It's about finding your own path, your own truth." Richard looked at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "When we were young, you always said that the bow was a mirror of the soul." I laughed at that. I thought it was too poetic, too imprecise. I wanted numbers, data, certainties. A group of children ran by them, carrying improvised wooden bows, imitating the movements they had seen Emily make. Richard observed them with a melancholic smile. "Tomorrow is the final," he said, standing up. "Regardless of the result, you've already changed everything." He paused as if wanting to say something more, but merely nodded and walked away. When night fell, Emily returned to the simple lodging where she was staying. Her reception, a pile of letters awaited her. They were messages from children in her community project, each telling how her story had inspired them to dream bigger. Lying in her bed, Emily held her grandfather's bow, her fingers tracing the carved letters that had guided her life. Tomorrow would be the decisive day, but somehow she felt that the true victory had already been won. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the dreams of a new generation that was beginning to rediscover the ancient magic of archery, a magic that didn't need batteries, didn't depend on algorithms, and spoke directly to the heart of those who dared to listen. The day of the grand finale dawned with an electric energy in the air. Even before the sun had fully risen, a line was forming at the entrance to the Olympic Training Center. People of all ages, many carrying handcrafted bows, anxiously waited to witness what promised to be a historic moment in the sport. Emily woke with the first ray of sun, as she had done every day for decades. Her morning ritual remained unchanged, an hour of meditation, followed by breathing exercises her grandfather had taught her as a child. The simplicity of her routine contrasted dramatically with the magnitude of the day that was beginning. In the cafeteria, while having her modest breakfast, Emily observed the other finalists. Most were surrounded by technical teams, analysts, reviewing data from the previous night, nutritionists supervising each portion of food. Tablets displayed complex performance graphs and detailed weather forecasts. Julie, who had also qualified for the final, sat timidly at her table. "I couldn't." "Sleep," confessed the young woman, nervously fidgeting with her cup of tea. "I spent the whole night thinking about what you told me about the leaf dancing with the wind." Emily smiled, sharing her whole grain bread. "You know, Julie, on mornings before competitions, my grandfather always took me for a walk in the field. He said we needed to greet the day before challenging it." "Is there still time for a walk?" asked Julie, her eyes shining with hope. The two went out to the gardens of the training center, where the morning mist still covered the grass like a delicate veil. As they walked, Emily shared stories of her community project, of how she taught children to make their own bows with simple materials, to find their own strength in simplicity. "Technology isn't bad," explained Emily, watching a bird take flight. "It's like any tool. Its value depends on how we use it. The problem is when we stop trusting our instincts, our natural connection with the world around us." Other finalists, seeing the two walking, began to spontaneously join the stroll. Soon, a small group had formed, sharing experiences and anxieties. It was a surreal scene, elite athletes, some wearing equipment that cost more than a car, attentively listening to the simple words of a woman who carried a wooden bow. Back at the gymnasium, the transformation was visible. Some competitors had simplified their equipment, removing sensors they now considered more distracting than useful. Others practiced breathing techniques instead of consulting performance apps. Emily found Michael, her former coach, discreetly organizing a group of children who had come from her community project. They had pooled money to rent a bus and travel overnight, determined to see their teacher compete. "They brought this for you," said Michael, handing Emily a small package. Inside was a handcrafted necklace made with small pieces of wood. Each child in the project had carved a letter, forming the phrase, "The heart is the best sensor." Emily put on the necklace, feeling the gentle weight of the wood against her chest. The simple words carried all the meaning of her journey. Richard Morgan, observing the scene from afar, seemed lost in thought. His phone rang incessantly. Executives, shareholders, all concerned about the impact this competition was having on the sports equipment market. But for the first time in years, he wasn't answering the calls. The grand finale would be conducted in 2 stages. In the first, the 10 finalists would compete in a series of elimination shots. Only the 5 best would advance to the final challenge, a single shot at 100 meters, with special conditions that would be revealed only at the decisive moment. The bleachers were completely packed, handcrafted banners mixed with official flags. In a special corner, the children from Emily's community project had organized a unique cheering section. Instead of shouts or applause, they maintained absolute silence during the shots, respecting the concentration their teacher always emphasized. As the finalists prepared, a gentle wind began to blow through the gymnasium. Emily closed her eyes, feeling its direction, its strength, its invisible dance. The bow in her hands seemed to vibrate gently, as if it too were preparing for the most important moment in its history. The carved words gleamed in the morning light, "Patience conquers steel." Never had that phrase carried so much meaning. It was no longer just a personal mantra now. It had become the silent cry of a revolution in the sport. The first stage of the final began with an atmosphere of palpable expectation. The 10 finalists positioned themselves in their lanes, each carrying not only their equipment, but also the weight of representing different philosophies of the sport. The challenge was complex: 5 consecutive shots, alternating between fixed and moving targets, with distances varying between 60 and 90 meters. Each shot would have specific scoring criteria, and only the 5 best scorers would advance to the final challenge. Emily observed her competitors with respect. There was Alice Chen, world champion, whose bow seemed straight out of a science fiction movie. Marco Ruiz, who had developed his own digital sight system. And, of course, Julie, who now competed with significantly simpler equipment than at the beginning of the championship. "First shooter, position," announced the sound system. Alice Chen advanced, her bow emitting soft beeps as various sensors analyzed the environmental conditions. Her shots were precise, technically perfect, but something seemed different in her posture. There was a subtle hesitation, as if she were beginning to question her dependence on technology. One by one, the competitors made their shots. Some maintained their completely technological approach, others had adapted their styles, seeking a balance between modernity and tradition. The audience watched in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing more than a competition. It was a moment of transformation in the sport. When Julie's turn came, the young archer surprised everyone. She had deactivated most of her bow's sensors, keeping only the essentials. Her movements were more fluid, more natural. Before each shot, she closed her eyes for a moment, as Emily had taught her. Her performance was impressive, not perfect, but authentic. Emily was the last to shoot. As she walked to her position, she instinctively touched the wooden necklace the children had given her. The gymnasium fell into a deep silence, as if the very air waited in suspense. Her first shot was to a fixed target at 60 meters, precise, centered, like a perfectly tuned musical note. The second challenge was a moving target at 70 meters. Emily not only hit the center, but did so at the exact moment the target changed direction, demonstrating an almost supernatural understanding of movement. For the third shot, the gymnasium lights were suddenly reduced, simulating low visibility, conditions at 80 meters. While other competitors had hesitated in this challenge, Emily seemed to move in harmony with the shadows. The fourth target was the most complex. 2 simultaneous targets at 85 meters, which had to be hit with less than a second difference. Emily executed the shots in a movement so fluid, it seemed a choreographed dance. For the final shot, at 90 meters, an artificial gust of wind was activated, creating extremely challenging conditions. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the wind pattern. When she shot, the arrow cut through the air in a trajectory that defied physics itself, finding the center of the target as if guided by a force greater than technology. When the results were announced, 5 archers had qualified for the final. Emily with a maximum score, Julie in second place, demonstrating extraordinary evolution, Alice Chen, who even with all her technology had finished, third, Marco Ruiz in fourth, and a young Brazilian archer, Peter Santos, completing the group. The bleachers exploded in applause. The children from the community project jumped with joy, their voices finally freeing themselves from the respectful silence they had maintained during the trials. Richard Morgan, who observed everything from the VIP area, took his phone and made a surprising call. Cancel the launch of the new sensor line. We're going to rethink everything. The future of the sport isn't where we thought. As the finalists prepared to leave the competition area, Michael approached Emily with tears in his eyes. "You're not just shooting arrows," he said softly. "You're planting seeds of change." Emily hugged her former mentor, feeling the weight of the moment. The decisive final was in a few hours, but something much bigger than a competition was at stake. It was the rebirth of an ancient art, a reminder that sometimes true progress lies in rediscovering the wisdom of the past. During the interval between the 2 stages of the final, the Olympic Training Center vibrated with a unique energy. The corridors and common areas had transformed into improvised meeting points, where athletes of different generations shared experiences and reflections on the future of the sport. Emily had retreated to a quiet corner of the inner garden, where she performed her ritual maintenance on the bow. Her experienced hands moved with methodical precision over the ancient wood, each gesture laden with memory and meaning. The handcrafted necklace made by the children from the community project rested gently on her chest, constantly reminding her of the true purpose of her journey. Julie, who had surprised everyone with her second place in the first stage, approached timidly. "May I watch?" she asked, sitting close to Emily. "Of course," replied Emily, continuing her work. "You know, my grandfather always said that caring for the bow is like caring for your own heart. It needs to be done with attention and regularity." As Emily explained each movement, other finalists began to discreetly approach. Alice Chen, the world champion, was the first to sit with them, followed by Marco Ruiz and Peter Santos. Soon an informal circle formed around Emily. "All this technology we've developed," commented Alice, looking at her own ultra-technological bow, "and yet, there's something in your way of shooting that we can't replicate with sensors." Emily smiled, taking a small leather pouch from her bag. "My grandfather kept different types of bird feathers he found in this pouch. He taught me that each feather tells a story about the wind." She opened the pouch, revealing a colorful collection of feathers. Some are more resistant, others more flexible. Each one teaches us something about adaptation and resilience. The young archers watched, fascinated, as Emily demonstrated how different feathers reacted to the gentlest breath. It was an improvised lesson about natural aerodynamics, deeper than any computerized analysis. Richard Morgan, who was passing by, stopped when he saw the scene. He observed from a distance, his face a mixture of complex emotions. His phone constantly vibrated in his pocket, but for the first time in years he completely ignored it. Michael Sullivan joined the group, bringing with him an album of old photographs. "I found this in the Federation archives," he said, opening the album. The photos showed competitions from the 80s and 90s, when the sport still maintained a stronger connection to its traditional roots. "Look at this one," Michael pointed to a particular photo. It showed a young Emily, then 16, next to Richard Morgan. Both smiled at the camera, their traditional bows in hand. "It was the day you two broke the youth record." Richard, who was still watching from a distance, couldn't contain his emotion upon seeing the photograph. He slowly approached the group. "That day," he said, his voice laden with memory, "we competed with practically identical equipment. The difference was in the archer, not the bow." A meaningful silence hovered over the group. Alice Chen was the first to react, beginning to remove sensors from her bow. "I think we've lost ourselves amid so much data," she said. "We've forgotten to listen to the bow, the wind, our own bodies." The children from Emily's community project, who had been authorized to remain at the center during the break, approached carrying their handcrafted bows. One of them, a girl no more than 10 years old, proudly showed off her bow made of PVC. "Ms. Emily taught us that it's not the bow that makes the archer," said the little one, her voice full of conviction. "It's the heart that guides the arrow." The simple wisdom of the child provoked emotional smiles. Emily took the girl's PVC bow, demonstrating how small adjustments in posture could compensate for the limitations of the material. Richard Morgan observed everything with a transformed look. He took his phone and began making quick notes. "Perhaps," he said more to himself than to others, "it's time for our company to invest in grassroots programs, in community projects like yours, Emily." The sun was beginning to lean on the horizon, signaling that the final stage was approaching. The finalists began to disperse, each carrying with them not only their equipment, but also a new perspective on the sport. Emily remained a moment longer in the garden, her hands still caressing her grandfather's bow. The words carved in the wood seemed to pulse with a new energy. "Patience conquers steel." That ancient wisdom was transforming not just a competition, but an entire sport. Michael, who had stayed behind, placed his hand on his former student's shoulder. "You've always been a teacher, Emily, even when you were just a competitor. Now you're teaching all of us to rediscover the soul of archery." The sound system announced that the final would begin in 30 minutes. Emily put her bow, in its case with the same calmness as always. The greatest test was still to come, but the true victory was already happening in the hearts and minds of those witnessing this historic moment. The announcement of the final test caused a buzz at the Olympic Training Center. The last stage would be a single shot at 100 meters, but with an unexpected twist. The archers would have to shoot at sunset when natural visibility began to diminish. It was a challenge that would test not only precision, but the true essence of archery. The 5 finalists were led to a special preparation room. Alice Chen had drastically simplified her equipment, keeping only the essential sensors. Marco Ruiz adjusted his bow with more intuitive movements, less dependent on data. Peter Santos alternated between calibrating his equipment and practicing breathing exercises he had learned watching Emily. And Julie, the revelation of the championship, had found a unique balance between tradition and modernity. Emily sat in a quiet corner, her fingers gently tracing the carved letters on her bow. The handcrafted necklace from the community project children rested on her chest, each carved piece carrying the hopes and dreams of a new generation. A technician entered the room to explain the final details. The shot will be made exactly when the sun touches the horizon. Atmospheric conditions will be constantly changing during this period. You will have only one chance. The other competitors immediately began consulting their devices, seeking data on wind patterns and light changes during twilight. Emily in turn closed her eyes and began a breathing exercise her grandfather had taught her. Richard Morgan briefly appeared in the room, carrying an expression different from his usual arrogance. He approached Emily with hesitant steps. "Remember our first championship together?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "You taught me a breathing technique before the final. I pretended I didn't need it, that it was for beginners, but I used it and it worked." Emily opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of her former colleague. "Pride sometimes prevents us from recognizing the simplest truths," she replied. "My company is changing," continued Richard. "After this competition, we're launching a support program for archery community projects. We want to sponsor initiatives like yours." Emily smiled, but shook her head. "The project doesn't need much, Richard. Just hearts willing to teach and learn." Michael Sullivan entered the room, carrying something wrapped in an old fabric. "I found this in the Federation archive," he said, revealing an old arrow, handcrafted. "It was your grandfather's. He used this arrow to win the national championship in 1962. Emily took the arrow with reverence, feeling the weight of history in her hands. The wood was darkened by time, but the structure remained perfectly aligned. The feathers, tied with artisanal precision, still maintained their original shape. "He always said that an arrow carries more than a tip," murmured Emily, studying the handwork. "It carries the soul of the archer." The other finalists approached, attracted by the history. Alice Chen touched the ancient arrow with admiration. "All our technology," she said, "and we still can't replicate this perfect simplicity." Julie, who observed everything with bright eyes, took a modern arrow from her case. "We can learn from both worlds," she said, comparing the two arrows. "Tradition teaches us the heart of the sport, and technology can help us preserve it." The sound system announced there were 15 minutes until the start of the final test. The competitors began their final preparations. Emily carefully stored her grandfather's arrow. She wouldn't use it in the competition, but its presence was a powerful reminder of her heritage. The children from the community project had created an organized cheering section in the bleachers. They wore hand-painted t-shirts with the phrase "The heart is the best sensor," and held PVC bows as a symbol that excellence didn't depend on expensive resources. As the finalists headed to the competition area, the sun began its descent on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't just a competition, it was the meeting of two eras, the bridge between tradition and future. The bow in her hands seemed to vibrate with its own energy, the carved words shining under the twilight light. "Patience conquers steel." In a few minutes, that ancient wisdom would be put to the test one last time. The shooting field was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. An almost sacred silence hovered over the Olympic Training Center while the 5 finalists positioned themselves in their lanes. The challenge awaiting them was unique in the history of the sport, a single shot at 100 meters, precisely at the moment when the sun touched the horizon. The sky presented an extraordinary natural spectacle. Clouds in shades of pink and orange danced on the horizon, creating a breathtaking scenery. But for the archers, each cloud represented an additional variable to be considered: changes in light, unpredictable air currents, constantly transforming shadows. Peter Santos was the first to position himself. The young Brazilian, who had grown up training in simple conditions in the countryside, seemed to find comfort in the minimalist challenge. His equipment, though modern, had been stripped of several sensors during the championship. Marco Ruiz came next, his movements demonstrating a new fluidity that contrasted with his former technological dependence. Beside him, Alice Chen, the world champion, positioned herself with a different posture than usual. Her transformation was visible. Mechanical precision had given way to a more natural grace. Julie occupied her position with a calm confidence she hadn't shown at the beginning of the competition. Her bow reflected the journey of discovery she had experienced, a harmonious hybrid between tradition and modernity. The young athlete's nervousness had transformed into a centered serenity. Emily was the last to take her place. Her wooden bow captured the last golden rays of the sun, making the carved words shine as if they were alive. Patience conquers steel. The handcrafted necklace on her neck moved gently with the evening breeze. In the bleachers, the atmosphere was one of reverence. The children from Emily's community project had infected the entire audience with their respect for the moment. There were no shouts or applause, only concentrated and respectful attention. Their small PVC bows were positioned in their laps, as silent symbols of hope and transformation. Richard Morgan watched from the VIP area, his usual impeccable suit replaced by more casual attire. At his side, executives from his company watched with interest, their expressions revealing that something greater than a sports competition was at stake. Michael Sullivan was near the competition area, his face marked by decades of experience in the sport, showing contained emotion. In his hands, he held the album of old photographs like a guardian of the sport's memory. A Federation meteorologist approached the judges, sharing data about atmospheric conditions. The wind was beginning to change significantly, creating complex patterns of air currents. The temperature was gradually dropping, affecting air density. Each minute brought new variables to the already challenging equation. The coaches of the other competitors made last-minute adjustments to the equipment, consulting tablets and sensors. Emily, in turn, merely closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the environment around her. Her years teaching in the community project, where conditions were always unpredictable, had sharpened her ability to read nature. 3 minutes to sunset, announced the sound system. Alice Chen looked at her ultra-technological bow and in a surprising gesture turned off several of its sensors. "Some things," she said in a low voice, "need to be felt, not measured." Julie breathed in the way Emily had taught her, her chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm. Her eyes alternated between the target and the horizon, seeking a tuning with the moment. 2 minutes. Marco Ruiz adjusted his posture, abandoning the technical rigidity that characterized him. Peter Santos smiled slightly, as if recalling his first days in the sport, when he shot at improvised targets in his backyard. 1 minute. Emily opened her eyes, her calm gaze focused on the flaming horizon. The sun descended majestically, its light crossing layers of clouds and creating a spectacle of colors and shadows. The wind changed again, bringing with it the perfume of the garden trees. 30 seconds. The audience collectively held their breath. The children from the community project held each other's hands, their small faces a mixture of anxiety and admiration. Richard Morgan leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. "Archers, prepare yourselves." The sun touched the horizon, pouring its golden light one last time over the field. The moment of truth had arrived. The moment seemed suspended in time. The sun, touching the horizon, bathed the field with a golden light that transformed everything into a surrealist painting. The 5 finalists, each representing a different philosophy of the sport, awaited the signal with a palpable tension in the air. Peter Santos was the first to shoot. His arrow cut through the air with admirable precision, hitting the outer ring of the target's center, an exceptional result for the challenging conditions. The audience applauded respectfully as he lowered his bow with a satisfied smile. Marco Ruiz came next. Years of training with cutting-edge technology had prepared him for this moment, but it was his newly discovered connection with the traditional side of the sport that guided his shot. The arrow found its way to the second ring of the center, drawing gasps from the crowd. Alice Chen, the world champion, surprised everyone. At the last moment, she turned off her last active sensor. "Sometimes we need to forget what we've learned to remember what we already knew," she murmured, before releasing her arrow. The shot was magnificent, hitting the inner ring of the center. The bleachers exploded in applause. Julie took a deep breath, exactly as Emily had taught. Her eyes shone with a calm confidence that wasn't present at the beginning of the competition. Her shot was a perfect fusion of modern technique and traditional sensitivity. The arrow flew as if dancing with the wind, finding its place millimeters from the absolute center. Then came Emily's moment. The silence that fell over the stadium was almost physical. The children from the community project, their small PVC bows in their laps, held their breath. Richard Morgan in the VIP area leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the scene. Michael Sullivan held the album of old photos against his chest, like a talisman. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her fingers caressing the words carved into the bow. Patience conquers steel. The handcrafted necklace on her neck shone with the last rays of the sun. When she opened her eyes, something extraordinary happened. The wind, which had been unstable throughout the afternoon, began to change. Emily could feel the currents reorganizing, as if nature itself was conspiring to create a perfect moment. She waited, patient, while others would have rushed. 1 second passed. 2. The audience barely breathed. Then, with a fluid movement that seemed part of the sunset itself, Emily released her arrow. The projectile cut through the air, not like an object in motion, but as a natural extension of the moment. It was impossible to tell where the archer ended and the arrow began. The sound of impact echoed through the stadium like a soft thunder. The arrow not only hit the absolute center of the target, it split it in half, penetrating so deeply that it divided the structure at a perfect angle. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had stopped to witness that historic moment. Then from the bleachers, a child from the community project stood up. Her eyes shone with tears of joy as she raised her small PVC bow. One by one, other children followed her, until the entire section was standing, their simple bows raised in a silent tribute. The gesture spread like a wave. Julie was the first of the competitors to raise her bow, followed by Alice Chen, Marco Ruiz, and Peter Santos. Soon, the entire stadium was standing, professional and amateur archers united in a moment of deep recognition. Richard Morgan stood up in his VIP area, unconcealed tears streaming down his face. At his side, executives from his company witnessed the birth of a new era in the sport. Michael Sullivan held the photo album open, where a young Emily smiled alongside her grandfather. The image seemed to dialogue with the present, connecting generations across time. The sun finally disappeared on the horizon, but something new had been born in that twilight. It wasn't just a competition that had ended, it was a revolution that was just beginning. The dawn of the following day found the Olympic Training Center transformed. The news of Emily's historic shot had spread like wildfire, going viral on social networks and dominating sports headlines. The video of the moment when her arrow split the target in half already had millions of views. But it wasn't just the technical feat that captured the public's imagination. It was the story behind it. A woman who had abandoned a promising career to care for her sick mother, who never stopped teaching children in her community project, who returned to the sport not seeking glory, but to prove that excellence didn't depend on resources. The children from the community project, who had slept in the center's lodging after the competition, woke to find their email inboxes flooded with messages. Schools, clubs, and organizations from all over the country wanted to know more about their PVC bows and training methodology. The Free Instinct movement was spontaneously being born in different places. Emily was sitting in her usual corner of the garden, performing her morning maintenance on the bow. The rising sun made the carved words shine with a new light. Patience conquers steel. Beside her, the victory trophy reflected the golden light, but her eyes were focused on something much more precious, a simple notebook where she planned the lessons for her community project. Julie approached silently, carrying not only her competition bow, but also a simpler one made of basic materials. "I spent all night making this," she said, showing the handcrafted bow. "It's not perfect, but it's honest." Alice Chen appeared soon after, her eyes revealing a night of deep reflection. "My sponsors won't like it," she said with a smile. But I've decided to open a school in China, teaching the traditional approach alongside the modern. The most surprising news, however, came through Richard Morgan. He arrived at the garden carrying a folder of documents and a transformed expression. "Emily," he began, his voice laden with contained emotion, "I spent all night in a meeting with the company board. We're going to completely restructure our approach." He opened the folder, revealing projects for community training centers. "We want to create spaces where technology and tradition can coexist, where children of any background can learn the true spirit of the sport." Social networks were buzzing with the spreading movement. Hashtags like Chan Free Instinct and Changsha People's Archer dominated the trends. Videos of young people practicing with handcrafted bows multiplied, always with messages of thanks to Emily and her philosophy. Michael Sullivan, who observed everything with teary eyes, approached Emily with the album of old photos. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, showing a particular photo. In it, a young craftsman worked on a wooden bow, his calloused hands carving the words that would become legendary. The specialized media, which had initially ignored Emily's presence in the competition, now competed for an exclusive interview. But she continued politely declining, preferring to dedicate her time to the children surrounding her, eager to learn. One of those children, a vivacious-eyed girl named Mary, approached with her PVC bow. "Miss Emily," she asked, "how did you know you would succeed?" Emily smiled, taking the small bow in her hands. "I didn't know, Mary, but I learned that when we do something with a true heart, the result is only part of the story. What matters is the journey and the lives we touch along the way." The simple words perfectly captured the spirit of the moment. It wasn't just a victory in a competition, it was the rebirth of a philosophy that transcended the sport. In a corner of the garden, a group of young archers began to gather regularly. They called themselves Disciples of Instinct, a mix of professional and amateur athletes united by the desire to rediscover the essence of archery. Julie had become a kind of informal leader of the group, sharing the teachings she had received from Emily. Richard Morgan, observing the scene, made a surprising announcement. His company was developing a new line of equipment called Essence, which combined modern technology with traditional principles. "Each bow will come with a special manual," he explained, telling Emily's story and the importance of keeping the tradition alive. The movement was beginning to transcend archery. Other sports began to question their own relationship with technology and tradition. It was as if Emily had opened a door that many didn't know existed, a path back to the essence without abandoning progress. The afternoon found Emily back at her community project in the small countryside town. The simple warehouse where she taught her classes was different, not in its physical structure, but in the energy that filled it. The walls, once empty, now displayed photos of the historic moment at the championship, alongside drawings made by the children. The number of students had tripled since her victory. Entire families appeared for the classes, some traveling hours just to participate, but Emily maintained the same simple and effective approach: PVC bows, straw targets, and a lot of individual attention to each student. "The bow is just an instrument," she explained to a group of newcomers. "The real equipment is in here." She gently touched her chest, exactly where the handcrafted necklace from the children rested. A surprise awaited at the entrance of the warehouse. Julie had arrived without warning, bringing with her a group of young professional archers. They carried their competition equipment in one hand and handcrafted bows in the other. "We came to learn," Julie said simply. "And to teach too, if you'll allow." The fusion was natural and inspiring. Professional athletes sat beside children from the project, sharing experiences and learning from each other. Technology wasn't abandoned, it was integrated in a more conscious and balanced way. Richard Morgan kept his promise. His company began providing basic materials for community projects all over the country. More importantly, it sent experienced craftsmen to teach the making of traditional bows, ensuring that ancestral knowledge wouldn't be lost. Alice Chen maintained regular contact, sending videos of her new school in China. There, students began with traditional bows before being introduced to modern technology. "We need to know the roots before reaching the branches," she explained in her messages. Michael Sullivan became a frequent visitor to the project. His stories about the early days of the sport enchanted the students, creating a living bridge between past and present. The album of old photos became a shared treasure, inspiring new generations. One afternoon, while observing an ongoing class, Emily noticed something extraordinary. One of her youngest students was teaching a breathing technique to a professional archer. The scene perfectly captured the essence of what the free instinct movement had become, a genuine exchange of knowledge, without hierarchies based on equipment or status. The bow her grandfather had made continued to be her daily companion. The words "patience conquers steel" had become a mantra repeated in community projects across the country. But their meaning had evolved. It was no longer just about the victory of tradition over technology, but about finding the balance between both. One day, a reporter finally managed to convince Emily to give an interview. The final question was simple: what do you hope for the future of the sport? Emily looked out the warehouse window, where children and adults, beginners and professionals, practiced together under the afternoon sun. "The future is already here," she replied. "It's in every child who discovers they can be great even with little, in every athlete who rediscovers the pure joy of the sport, in every person who understands that evolution doesn't mean abandoning our roots." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with the same colors as that historic day of the competition. Emily picked up her bow, feeling the familiar weight of the wood in her hands. The carved words gleamed with the evening light, truer than ever. A new generation was being born, one that understood that greatness doesn't come from expensive equipment or advanced technology, but from a sincere heart and true dedication. Emily's legacy wasn't just a victory in a competition, it was a silent revolution that would continue echoing through the years. 6 months after the historic competition, the free instinct movement had transformed into a global phenomenon. The small warehouse where Emily taught her classes had become a kind of temple of archery, attracting visitors from all corners of the world. On a particularly special morning, Emily arrived at the project earlier than usual. Dew still covered the grass of the improvised training field, and the sun was just beginning to awaken on the horizon. In her hands, besides her inseparable grandfather's bow, she carried a package wrapped in simple fabric. Inside the warehouse, a silent transformation had occurred during the night. The walls, previously decorated only with photos and drawings, now displayed an impressive collection of traditional bows from different cultures. It was a surprise gift organized by her students. Each piece told a unique story of perseverance and tradition. Julie, who now divided her time between professional competitions and teaching at the project, arrived shortly thereafter. Her own competition bow had evolved, an elegant hybrid that incorporated traditional elements into modern ones. "The children are anxious," she said with a smile. "They barely slept last night." The reason for the anxiety was the inauguration of a new program, Masters of Tomorrow. The idea had been born from the project children themselves. They wanted to teach other children, perpetuating not just the techniques, but also the philosophy they had learned from Emily. "Each one teaches what they know," Emily used to say, "and learns while teaching." The first students began to arrive. Among them was Mary, the girl who had asked Emily how she knew she would succeed. Now, with her carefully decorated PVC bow, she would be one of the first youth instructors in the program. Richard Morgan also appeared that morning, but not as the powerful businessman from before. Dressed simply, he carried a traditional bow he had learned to make in a craftsmanship course. "Some lessons," he said, "we need to relearn from scratch." The package Emily had brought contained something special, a new bow carved by her own hands under the guidance of an old craftsman from the region. She had worked on it for months, applying every lesson her grandfather had taught her through example. "This," she said, revealing the bow to her students, "will be our community bow. Each person who comes here can use it, feel its history, add their own energy to it." The words carved in the new wood were different, but perfectly complemented the message of her grandfather's bow. The heart teaches, the hands learn. The morning progressed with a special energy. Children taught adults to make PVC bows, while professional athletes learned ancestral techniques from young instructors. The traditional hierarchy of the sport had been completely reimagined. Michael Sullivan, who was now a constant presence in the project, documented everything in a new photo album. "We're living a historic moment," he said, his eyes shining with paternal pride. "It's the perfect union between past and future." Alice Chen, connected by video call from her school in China, showed how the movement had adapted to the local culture. Her students combined millennial bow and arrow techniques with the precision of modern technology. "It's no longer about choosing a side," she explained. "It's about finding harmony." A journalist who was following the day for a documentary asked Emily what was the secret of the project's success. Emily smiled, picking up a simple arrow. "See this arrow?" she asked. "No matter how sophisticated the bow is, the arrow always needs to find its own way. Our task is just to point in the right direction and trust." In the training field, Mary gathered her first group of students. With a confidence only children possess, she began her class. "First, we need to understand that the bow is not a tool, it's a friend. And with friends, we need to learn to talk." Emily watched, her eyes moist with emotion. The handcrafted necklace on her neck seemed lighter now, as if the weight of responsibility was being naturally distributed among all those young and enthusiastic souls. The sun was high in the sky when a final surprise happened. A group of traditional craftsmen coming from different parts of the country arrived at the project. They brought with them the proposal to create a bow-making school where ancestral techniques would be preserved and transmitted to new generations. "The future of the sport," said one of them, an old man with calloused hands and a serene smile, "is in remembering where we came from while deciding where we're going." Emily touched the carved words on her bow, feeling under her fingers not just the letters, but all the history they represented. "Patience conquers steel" had never made so much sense as in that moment, when steel and patience finally learned to dance together. As the sun began its downward journey in the sky, Emily's community project vibrated with transformative energy. The inauguration day of the Masters of Tomorrow program had been more significant than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just a new chapter in the project's history, it was the birth of a living legacy. Mary, the young instructor, had conducted her first class with a wisdom that seemed to transcend her age. Her simple words about friendship with the bow had touched not only her beginner students, but also the professional athletes present. A video of her class, spontaneously shared on social networks, was already beginning to go viral. "Did you see?" exclaimed Julie, showing her phone. "People are calling Mary the little sage. The comments are incredible." Emily smiled, watching her young student demonstrate a breathing technique to a mixed group of children and adults. Mary had perfectly understood the essence of what the project represented. It wasn't about being the best, but about helping each one find their best version. Richard Morgan, who had spent the entire day at the project, made a surprising announcement during the closing of activities. His company was changing its slogan from "Technology is power" to "Tradition and Innovation, the path of the heart." More than a marketing change, it was the reflection of a deep transformation in his vision of the sport. "Emily," he said, his voice laden with sincere emotion, "you haven't just changed archery. You've helped us rediscover our humanity in the sport." The craftsmen who had arrived earlier were already beginning to plan the bow-making school. In a corner of the warehouse, they had set up a small demonstration workshop where they taught the fundamentals of woodworking. The smell of sawdust mixed with the afternoon aroma, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Michael Sullivan, who had spent the day photographing each moment, gathered everyone for a special photo. In the EI Center, Emily held her historic bow. At her side, Mary proudly displayed her decorated PVC bow. Around them, a circle formed of people of all ages and backgrounds, each with their own bow, from the most sophisticated to the simplest. "This photo," said Michael, "is not just a record, it's a manifesto." Alice Chen, still connected by video, showed that her school in China had adopted a similar ritual, Her students now began each training session with 5 minutes of meditation, holding their bows and connecting with the history of the instrument. "The movement is growing in ways we never imagined," she commented. "Last week I received a letter from a monastery in Tibet. They want to integrate our teachings into their traditional archery practices." As the sun set, Emily gathered everyone in the training field for a special moment. The community bow she had carved would be used for the first time. One by one, each person present had the opportunity to make a shot, adding their energy to the history of the instrument. "Each arrow carries a piece of who we are," explained Emily. "And each shot is an opportunity to reconnect with our essence." The last ray of sun of the day found the group gathered in a circle, sharing stories and dreams. The children from the project spoke enthusiastically about their plans to expand the Masters of Tomorrow program to other communities. The professional athletes discussed ways to integrate the principles of free instinct into high-level competitions. Emily observed everything with a serene smile, her bow resting gently in her lap. Her grandfather's words, "Patience conquers," "Steel," had become more than a motto. They were now a life philosophy that transcended the sport. The gentle night wind brought with it the whisper of thousands of stories that were just beginning to be written. In every corner of the world, people were rediscovering the magic of archery, not as a competition, but as a path of self-knowledge and connection. "The true legacy," thought Emily, "is not in trophies or records, but in the hearts we transform along the way." A year had passed since that historic shot that split the target in half. Emily's small community project had transformed into a global phenomenon, but maintained its simple and welcoming essence. The warehouse remained the same, just more alive, more full of shared stories and dreams. On a special morning, Emily arrived at the project to find a surprise. Representatives from community projects from various countries had gathered for the first international meeting of the Free Instinct movement. The courtyard was filled with bows of all types, from the most technological to the most artisanal, each telling its own story. "It's like a family reuniting," commented Julie, who now coordinated a network of young instructors throughout the country. Her own bow had evolved once more, a unique project she had developed herself, combining traditional techniques with sustainable innovations. Mary, the little sage, now 11 years old, had become a kind of youth ambassador for the movement. Her classes were streamed online to children all over the world, and her simple way of explaining complex concepts had inspired a new generation of young archers. "You know what's coolest?" said Mary, adjusting the handcrafted necklace she had received as a gift from Emily. "Children no longer ask how much the equipment costs, they ask what story it tells." Richard Morgan arrived accompanied by a different team than usual. They weren't executives or advisors, but craftsmen and educators. His company had undergone a profound transformation, creating a division dedicated exclusively to the development of community projects and preservation of traditional techniques. "Our profits decreased a bit," he admitted with a serene smile, "but our social relevance has grown exponentially. We discovered that there is a wealth that cannot be measured in numbers." Alice Chen, who had traveled especially from China for the meeting, brought with her a surprising revelation. Traditional monasteries had begun opening their doors to teach millennial archery techniques. The fusion between ancient wisdom and modern needs was creating a new way to practice the sport. "In my school," she explained, "we now begin each class with a ritual. Each student spends a few minutes with a traditional bow before using modern equipment. This has completely changed the way they relate to the sport." Michael Sullivan, always with his camera in hand, had compiled a documentary about the transformation of the sport. The images showed not only the technical evolution, but mainly the change in people's look, from professional athletes to beginner children. "The most incredible thing," he commented, showing some scenes, "is how the movement transcended archery. Other sports are beginning to rediscover their roots, seeking a balance between tradition and modernity." During the meeting, special workshops were held in the training field. Master craftsmen taught bow-making techniques, while engineers demonstrated how technology could be used consciously and sustainably. There was no longer division between the old and the new, only the search for harmony. Emily observed everything with a mix of joy and serenity. Her bow, the same that had split the target on that historic day, rested in her hands like an old friend. The carved words, "Patience conquers steel," shone with an ever deeper truth. One scene in particular captured her attention. A group of children had organized a small graduation ceremony for their PVC bows. Before receiving more advanced bows, they wanted to honor the simple instruments that had started their journey. "These bows," said one of them, her voice choked with emotion, "taught us that greatness doesn't depend on what we have, but on what we are." In the afternoon, everyone gathered for a special activity. Each participant in the meeting had brought a piece of wood from their region. Together, under the guidance of the craftsmen, they began to work on a new community bow, one that would carry within itself the energy and stories of different cultures. "This bow," explained Emily to the group, "will be a living symbol of our union. Each mark, each carving, tells the story of someone who chose to be part of this transformation." When the sun began to set, the group gathered in a circle in the training field. The new community bow, still unfinished, was passed from hand to hand. Each person added a small detail, a personal mark, while sharing a story or a dream. "What we're building here," said Emily, her voice soft but firm, "is bigger than a sports movement. We're rescuing something that goes beyond archery. We're relearning to connect with our deepest essence." The twilight painted the sky with colors that resembled that historic day of the competition, but now each sunset brought with it not only memories, but promises of a future where tradition and progress walked hand in hand. Night fell over the international meeting with a special softness. Handcrafted lanterns, made by students of the project, illuminated the training field with a welcoming light. The new community bow, now almost complete, rested on a simple pedestal, its entrails telling stories from different corners of the world. Emily observed the movement around her with teary eyes. Small groups formed naturally, sharing experiences and dreams. In one corner, Mary was teaching breathing techniques to instructors from other countries in one corner. In another, craftsmen exchanged knowledge about different types of wood and carving methods. Julie approached silently, carrying something wrapped in an old fabric. "We found this in the Federation archives," she said, revealing a yellowed notebook worn by time. It was Emily's grandfather's diary, full of technical drawings and reflections on the art of archery. "There's a passage here," continued Julie, carefully opening a marked page, "that seems to have been written for this moment." And she read aloud, "The true bow is not made only of wood and string, it is made of time, of patience, of love. Each arrow we shoot carries not only our strength, but our history." The words from the past echoed with special force that night. Emily took the diary with trembling hands, recognizing her grandfather's firm handwriting. Among the technical drawings, she found the original sketch of the bow she now carried, including the words that would become her mantra: "Patience conquers steel." Richard Morgan, who had remained for the closing of the meeting, made an announcement that surprised everyone. His company was creating a foundation dedicated exclusively to the development of social archery. The first project would be the construction of training centers in underprivileged communities, all following the philosophy of free instinct. But most importantly, he said, is that each center will be administered by local people, maintaining their own cultural characteristics. "We don't want to create franchises, we want to nurture seeds." Alice Chen shared that the movement had inspired a silent revolution in professional sports. In recent international competitions, several athletes had opted to use simpler equipment, seeking a deeper connection with the essence of the sport. "It's no longer about having the most expensive equipment," she explained. "Here it's about finding the equipment that best expresses who you are." Michael Sullivan had prepared a special surprise. On an improvised screen, he projected a short documentary he had produced throughout the year. The images showed not only the high transformation of the sport, but mainly the change in looks, in smiles, in the way people related to archery. The final sequence of the documentary showed Emily teaching a child to make their first PVC bow. The scene was simple, but loaded with meaning. "What you're building is not just a bow," she said in the video. It's a bridge between who you are and who you can become. Mary, who had gathered all the children present, organized a special presentation. Each young archer demonstrated a different technique, mixing traditional elements with their own creativity. The show culminated with a synchronized shot, PVC bows side by side with professional equipment, all finding their targets with the same precision. When the night was almost over, Emily gathered everyone for a final moment of reflection. The community bow, now complete, was placed in the center of the circle. Each person present had contributed a detail, a mark, a story. "This bow," said Emily, her voice laden with emotion, "is more than a symbol. It's a living testament that we are stronger when we unite our differences. Each mark here tells a story of transformation, of discovery, of connection." The words carved on the new community bow were a fusion of languages and cultures, but all carried the same essence. The heart is the best guide. The international meeting had come to an end, but its impact would continue reverberating for generations. The free instinct movement had transformed into something greater than a teaching method or a sports philosophy. It was now a path of rediscovery, of reconnection with essential values that transcended the sport. Emily touched one last time the carved words on her historic bow. Patience conquers steel had become more than a motto. It was a reminder that the greatest transformations begin in the heart and spread silently, like ripples on a quiet lake. The morning after the closing of the international meeting, Emily arrived at the project even earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even fully risen when she opened the doors of the warehouse, now impregnated with the energies and stories shared the night before. In her hands, besides her inseparable bow, she carried her grandfather's diary. She spent a few moments leafing through the yellowed pages, discovering notes and reflections that seemed to echo through time with renewed wisdom. One annotation in particular caught her attention. "The true master is not one who accumulates victories, but one who sows possibilities." The words, written decades ago, seemed to have been specifically destined for this moment. Mary arrived soon after, carrying not only her decorated PVC bow, but also a new one which she had made during the workshops of the international meeting. Her eyes shone with contagious enthusiasm. "Miss Emily," she called, "may I show you something?" The girl had created a small diary of her own, inspired by Emily's grandfather's. On the pages, colorful drawings showed different breathing and posture techniques, explained with the simplicity and wisdom that only a child could have. "I want other children to be able to learn the way I learned," explained Mary, "with the heart, not just with technique." Gradually, other students began to arrive. Many had remained after the international meeting, not wanting to miss the opportunity to participate in this special morning. The training field came to life, with a harmonious mixture of languages and cultures. Julie, who had decided to postpone her participation in the next World Championship to dedicate herself to the development of the Masters of Tomorrow program, gathered a group of young instructors for a special planning session. "What we've learned here," she said, "can't stay just among us. We need to find ways to make this wisdom reach more people." Richard Morgan appeared briefly, bringing the first sketches of the community training centers that his foundation would build. The designs were simple but functional, prioritizing spaces for communal living and collective learning. "Each center," he explained, "will have a space dedicated to the making of handcrafted bows. We want people not only to practice the sport, but to understand and preserve its essence." Alice Chen, who had delayed her return flight to participate in this last day, shared exciting news. Monasteries in Tibet had begun to document their ancestral archery techniques, creating a bridge between millennial wisdom and contemporary needs. "It's as if the circle were closing," she observed. "The ancient and the new, finally finding harmony." Michael Sullivan, always with his camera in hand, captured precious moments of this historic morning. His experienced eye perceived something special happening. It wasn't just the closure of an event, but the beginning of something much greater. Emily gathered everyone for a final activity. In the center of the field, the new community bow was placed beside her historic bow. The words carved on both, Patience conquers steel and the heart is the best guide seem to dialogue with each other, telling a story of transformation and continuity. Each of you, said Emily, her voice soft but firm, now carries a part of this story. It's no longer just my journey or my grandfather's journey. It's our collective journey. Mary approached timidly, carrying her drawing diary. May I read something I wrote? She asked. Emily nodded with a smile. The girl opened her notebook and, with a clear voice, read, The bow is not just a piece of wood, just as the arrow is not just a piece of bamboo. They are parts of a story that began long before us and will continue long after. Each time we shoot, we are not alone. We are connected with all who came before and all who will come after. An emotional silence followed the young archer's words. Emily felt her eyes well up, recognizing in Mary's simple words the same wisdom her grandfather had tried to transmit to her so many years ago. The sun was now high in the sky, its light dancing through the windows of the warehouse, illuminating the bows hanging on the walls, each telling its own story of discovery and transformation. Emily picked up her bow, feeling the familiar weight of the wood in her hands. The carved words shone with a special light. Patience conquers steel. But now she understood that the true victory wasn't in competition, but in continuity, in the ability to pass on not just techniques, but values that transcended the sport. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky with the same colors as that historic day when Emily had split the target in half. The community project was quiet now. Most of the international visitors had already departed, taking with them seeds of transformation to plant in their own countries. Emily remained on the training field, her faithful bow in her hands, watching. The last ray of sun play with the words carved in the wood. Patience conquers steel, a truth that had transformed not only her life but an entire sport. Mary approached silently, carrying her drawing diary and her PVC bow. Miss Emily, she said softly, may I stay here with you a little longer? The two sat on the grass, sharing a moment of quietness while twilight embraced the field. Emily opened her grandfather's diary, and Mary her own drawing notebook, past and future dialoguing in silence. You know, Mary, began Emily, when I was young, I thought success in sport meant winning medals and breaking records. My grandfather tried to teach me something different, but I only truly understood after having to abandon competitions to care for my mother. Mary listened attentively, her eyes shining with wisdom beyond her years. It's like you always say, she replied. Sometimes we need to lose something to find something greater. The gentle night wind brought with it echoes of the transformations of the last few months. The free instinct movement had spread around the world, not as a technique to be copied, but as a philosophy to be lived. Richard Morgan had left a letter before departing. In it, he announced that his company was creating a special line of basic equipment, which would be donated to community projects. Some victories, he wrote, cannot be measured in medals or profits. Julie, who observed the scene from afar, approached with news. The International Archery Committee had created a new category in official competitions, the free category, where athletes could use any type of equipment, from technological bows to the most traditional. It's more than a rule change, explained Julie. It's a recognition that excellence can take many forms. Alice Chen's words, sent by message before her flight back to China, echoed with special meaning. What began as a competition has transformed into a reconnection. We're not just preserving old techniques, we're rediscovering our humanity through sport. Michael Sullivan had left his photo album as a gift, now filled not only with old memories, but also with recent moments that documented the transformation of the sport. On the last page, a special photo, Emily and Mary side by side, each with her bow, one of ancient wood, another of colorful PVC, both smiling with the same light in their eyes. The new community bow, created during the international meeting, now occupied a place of honor in the warehouse. Its carvings told stories from different cultures, but all converged to the same truth. Greatness is not in the equipment, but in the heart of the one who uses it. Miss Emily, called Mary, pointing. To the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear, Do you think your grandfather imagined all this would happen?" Emily smiled, gently touching the letters carved into her bow. "I think he knew that some seeds, when planted with love, grow in ways we cannot predict." The community project had transformed into much more than a training center. It was now a meeting point between past and future, between tradition and innovation. Each bow on the walls, from the simplest to the most sophisticated, told a story of transformation and discovery. The final words of her grandfather's diary, which Emily had only now found, seemed to have been written especially for this moment. The true legacy is not in what we leave for the world, but in what we plant in people's hearts. As the last colors of the day bid farewell on the horizon, Emily and Mary remained seated, in silence, their bows resting in their laps, one of ancient wood, another of colorful PVC, different in appearance but identical in essence. It was the perfect personification of what the free instinct movement had become, a bridge between worlds, a dance between times, a constant reminder that true greatness is born when we open our hearts to learn and teach. And so, under the starry sky, the story continued, no longer